Thanks for taking time to join us today. I guess also, I just want to share that for today, we will also be trying out a slightly different way of presenting. So I will keep my PowerPoint slides to a short one so that we can spend more time on discussing and having more Q&A to make it more lively later on. All right, so without further ado, let me know if you can't see. If not, then I'll just continue. All right, Jeremy? Am I on? Just wait a second. I don't think I'm on full screen yet.
Yes,
okay.
I can see it.
All right. So without further ado, I think let's just jump right in. Hi everyone. My name is Ruben. I'm from IPOS International. So for those who are not familiar with us, we are the enterprise engagement arm of IPOS, the Intellectual Property Office of Singapore. So by enterprise engagement arm, it means that we reach out to the companies to share with companies on how exactly an IP, or in this case, intangible assets and intellectual properties, can play a part in your business and how they are actually your business asset to help you to grow your business, as well as to highlight to you what are some of the risks that you may have, so that you can take note of them, and especially when you venture into overseas. Okay, so there are a couple of pictures that I'd like to start off with, and just to trigger some thought. Unfortunately, this is actually on a digital platform, but nevertheless, I will still use this picture, and maybe you can join me by giving it some thoughts as to what I'm going to share next. So next two slides will be on pictures. Right now, what you see here is that I walk here on the top left. I have Grab, I have Eaton House, and I have a mom and pop store that sells kueh. Now, on this slide, what you see is that these are different companies that are birthed and born at different time. And one thing that I want to highlight is that they are not the first mover in the industry. And that goes as small as a mom and pop store that sells F&B all the way to a tech giant like Grab. And why I find this slide very relevant here is because I want to highlight to our audience, which especially some of them are startups, is that in the world of business, it's never about being the first mover. Though there are some advantages of being a first mover, it's not always about being the first one to launch the product. It's not always about having the best solution, or it's not even just about having the first in the world kind of solution to support certain issues. I guess what's important is that in a business, for you to succeed, it is really about finding your niche. It is about finding your market. And I draw that reference to these four companies that you can see over here. Grab is not the first one to come up with a demand and supply magic when it comes to public transport, but you actually have your Uber and your Lyft who started that. You have Eaton House, who's actually a very big and international, big Singapore company on preschool, but they are not the first in Singapore to launch something like that. You have on the right a mom and pop store that sell kueh that all of us know in our neighborhood, that a store like that. But yet they may not be the first, and they may not even have a lot of IP per se, but yet they have a lot of intangible assets like customers relationship, like the know-how with the clients. They know what kind of product sells best and that suits different clients at different time. And these are the little things that they own that allows them to succeed in that area where it's so full of competition. Even a shop like Wok-Hei really interests me because they are competing in a highly competitive industry when it comes to F&B in shops. But what they do is that they actually take a zicha, that is something that's so close to our heart from the heartlands, and they bring it down to the malls, and they did some repackaging, and with some new brand and some with a fantastic brand persona, they actually carve a market out for themselves to succeed. And then they have their own intangible assets in the area as well. So my main message here is that I want to highlight to all my audiences that you do not need to be the best, or you do not need to be the first, but it's really about finding out what are your special traits and intangibles that you have, carving a niche for yourself to succeed. Another one about this picture, another slide full of pictures here. What you see here are all vending machines, and I'm sure we are no stranger to them. If you're like my age or even older, then the machines on the right will be something that you're very familiar with. Those are the old school machines. In fact, they are even quite new already. There are even older ones where you can only put coins in. Now, and then those on the left, as you can see, is a wide variety, selling from ice cream to salmon to orange juice, pizzas, and chili crab. Now, there are a few points that I want to highlight over here. As you can see, a product is still a product. A vending machine is still a vending machine. But what has changed is that people take advantage of different technologies, take advantage of different breakthroughs, and then they start to incorporate them into old way of doing things. So for example, a box is still a box, but right now you actually put in different technology in having a freezer, in extracting juice out of orange, and yet maintaining all the hygiene. You have ready cooked product that the technology comes in many tiers. The first tier in how do you manage to prepare the food and keep them fresh at certain temperature? How do you reheat it? How do you dispense it? And how do you keep it? All these things within a box. And more importantly, that another kind of technology that we will talk about is the interface with the consumer. See, a vending machine is no longer just a vending machine. Nowadays, they all have their special LED screens over there. Some allow you to do touch screens. More importantly, when it comes to payment methods, no man's an island, so you can't just only accept coins now. So now you need to incorporate other people's technology, and that is in terms of payment gateway. So now you can accept credit card, you can accept EasyLink card and things like that. Now, what am I trying to illustrate here is that many of our businesses, especially for startups, you actually work with a lot of other partners, because what you have alone may not be enough to bring to fruition, may not be enough to bring it to a prototype or to a product. So you do need to work with different people. And I'm sure with all these vending machine companies, they are also working with different people to bring to you new offerings. And by doing so, they have created a lot of new intangible assets. And of course, you'll be wondering, what exactly am I talking about when I say intangible? And I'll share more with you later. One more point I want to highlight in this picture is that if you really go deep into intangible assets, what sets all these machines apart is not just only about the product that they have. It's not just only about their service offering and also whether how attractive and things like that. What really sets them apart is actually the location, a location. You see, so if you actually think a bit deeper, once I have because all these machines require a PowerPoint, and the moment I have one machine on this board, I can't have another 3 more machines on this board. So it's not just only how fancy is your service offering, but the moment I choke a spot, I reserve a spot, and that spot is mine. So with that in mind, in the business of vendings, the intangible asset is not just only the kind of technology you have in your boxes and what you can offer, but even the location that you can secure, that's going to set apart, that's going to make a difference in your business. Okay, and with that, allow me to introduce to you what exactly is intangible assets. There are many names for it, and I'm sure you will see this in our marketing collateral as well. But in my words, intangible assets are exactly it's the material form of all your creation. So if you have a fantastic idea about a jingle, you put it in the form of a song, you write it out in the form of notes. If you have a poem, if you have a fantastic marketing spiel, you put it down in a PowerPoint, you put it down in a presentation. If you have a very good technology idea, you actually put it down into a drawing, you actually make it into a technology. Okay, and then, or if you have some brand fantastic idea to come out with a logo, then you actually come out with a brand. So it is really the material form of all this creativity that you have, and these are your intangible assets. And within the sphere of intangible assets, some of them are registrable, and if you can register, it will then be intellectual property. And then as you register it, you give birth to what we call intellectual property rights. And then of course, we'll talk about what are some of these rights. And then of course, you have a lot of those that are non-registrable. So things like your customer's relationship, your know-how, trade secrets, data, copyright, regulatory approval, and so on and so forth. There are many of these assets that all of you will possess, and especially in startups, you have a lot of trade secrets. These are all your intangible assets that you can't register them, but yet these are the ones that will then help you to propel you to your business success. So people will be asking, Ruben, after you tell me all these things, where exactly are these assets, and how can you be so sure that they exist in my business? This is an example over here that you see that we have an espresso. If you ask anyone, they will just tell an espresso about selling coffee. But yet it's actually more than that. So as you can see, in order to ensure the success of this business, there are so many different kinds of intangibles that they are layered together to communicate and to convince the market that this is the way to go, this is the way to drink your coffee. So starting from your brand, you have a brand, you have a trademark in espresso, you have design in the way the whole machine looks, you have all the way to a patent, which is the technology behind how you extract the coffee. You even have copyright, which is all the form of the marketing. And more importantly, now you even have a club called an espresso club, which is a database of all your customers. You can order from that, it help you remember your orders, and so it help you to repeat your orders. And with that, it gives you so much more information about the target audience that you are interacting with. And then it creates a whole market, and then it creates suitable marketing content to target these customers to drive higher revenue. So as you can see, the whole business is protected by a slew of intangible assets, and each of these assets play a part to ensure the success of the business. Now, and another point that I want to highlight here is that businesses also depend on different assets at different time to grow. So if you talk about Apple, a long time ago, it's not that long, about 10 years ago, it's really about the technology, because it's the first one to come up with an application, to come up with a touch screen. It really changes the way we interact with our mobile phones. And I remember I was still using a BlackBerry back then. And now people will be looking at iPhone and say, hey, really, this is the breakthrough that fantastic now, because the incremental is getting smaller and smaller. Notwithstanding as they have their new chip right now, but really in terms of camera, how much more sharper can a camera get? And yet Apple is still able to command a certain premium in their product, and that is really propelled by and pushed forward by their brand. So first, you have a technology that defines your product, and then the brand comes in with the brand persona, brand story, and it builds on that brand. And now the brand allows you to carry on commanding that premium in the future journey. So this is really an example that I want to share with everyone on how IA plays a part in your business. And IA exists in all your business. If there's anything I want to take away today, I want to share with my audience to know that IP is really not a legal tool. I know that you need to talk to a lawyer when you want to file your trademark or patent, but it's really not just a legal tool. You have to use it in your business for you to benefit. Okay, so what you have here is a business cycle. So a typical from the time you create a product all the way to you commercializing, making revenue, and then after you do a review, and then the whole cycle. And throughout this whole cycle, there are constantly intangible assets being created, from your confidential information to your product type, to your prototype, to your designs, and then after that to when it comes to downstream, depending on how you want to work with your clients, how you want to work with your distributors, you're going to have different forms of intangible assets being created, different know-how being created, different trade secrets being created. Okay, so IA exists in the whole full business cycle, and you are using your IA when you are growing your business. You are using your IA when it comes to protecting your business idea as well. In view of time, I'll just quickly touch on this one. This is one, as our target audience today are many startups, this is one area that I want to highlight to everyone, that in today's context, when it comes to doing your business, a lot of things have changed, and there are many, many ways to commercialize. So from as simple as perhaps if you do have a breakthrough in terms of doing certain things in terms of technology, you can look at licensing. So licensing could be the easiest way or most immediate way for you to draw certain revenue. And all the way to the other extreme that you can say, I want to deploy everything myself. If I want to develop into the whole prototype, I want to develop into a whole complete product for me to sell. And then in between, there are a lot of other ways that you can look at, so for example, you can distribute through e-commerce, you can actually work with partners, you can work with distributors, you can work with a friend. If your business is franchisable, we can actually look at looking into a franchise. You can even look at joint venture with other people. So the most beautiful thing about expansion through these different downstream considerations is that you can pick and choose based on what are the resources available to you, and also depending on the market. So for example, if you are based in Singapore, you may want to think that in Singapore, I want to deploy everything myself. Okay, but when it comes to overseas, you can choose other methods. So I'll give a case in point where I show you Eaton House earlier. In Singapore, Eaton House owns all the school it runs. It doesn't do franchising, it doesn't do licensing. It runs all the school by itself. It bears the full risk, it bears the full rewards. When it comes to overseas, it's a mixture. So for key markets like China, they may have certain form of JV, they may have certain form of franchising. But when it comes to other countries, they may adopt franchising model. So with that, it allows them to harness and use the best way of entering different markets to get the biggest reward, and also in the way of reducing their risk. Now, this one I will share. We will talk a bit more later with Jeremy in our conversation in our Teh Tarik chat. But this is, I'm sure this is a question that a lot of startups will be constantly be at the back of their mind. Whether it's should I keep my breakthrough or my idea as a trade secret, or should I file for a patent? And this will be a constant struggle. But one thing that before I end off with this short session here is that every patent starts its life as a trade secret. Every patent starts its life as a trade secret. So you have your trade secret. And the important thing is constantly keep it as a secret before we can talk about patenting. So in short, I just want to leave these 4 points with you before we go to our coffee talk. Identify what you have. If you have it, own it. And if it's worth it, you have to protect it. And there is something for every budget. I'm not advocating that you have to file for every single thing when it comes to your IP, but there are ways to work around it to make sure that you have sufficient that is within your budget to do something like that. Okay, you have to align your intangible assets and your IP with your business objective. Don't just file for the sake of filing. It must be aligned to your business objective, and then these assets will come in very handy to help you. And last but not least, if you need help, get it. Okay, I do have a few resources over here. We have a lot of business guides, topical business guides, and I'll flash all these slides again later on at the end of the session after our Q&A. We also have complimentary IP chat. If you want to find out more, you can always have a talk with me later on, and we can connect from there. Okay, so with that, I hope I summarize it in the short 15 minutes, a quick overview of how important IA is in your business and how we can, then this will set the stage for our conversation later on. Thanks, Jeremy.
Thanks very much, Ruben. I'm just going to share screen quickly. So I hope everyone can see my slides. So yeah, if there's any questions from anyone, we will definitely answer it after this chat. We'll look at the chat board after this. So thank you very much, Ruben, for the very informative talk. I'm sure that the audiences are very intrigued by what you have shared. In fact, in recent news, I read a very high-profile trademark case that was involving Hai Di Lao, a Chinese hot pot chain. In fact, Hai Di Lao lost the IP lawsuit to another company called, I think, He Di Lao, and right after that, immediately Hai Di Lao went to trademark hundreds of names that are similar to the name Hai Di Lao. So I think hearing from you, there are a lot of terms that are being thrown out, patents, intangible assets, trademarks, copyrights. Can I just quickly ask you, what are the different types of intellectual properties and how is each one of them used?
Right, so thanks for that. In short, everything that you have are intangible assets because you can't touch, you can't feel, but they are assets to your business. So assets will be things like your trade secrets, things like your copyright. But within this realm of intangible assets, some of these can be filed, some of them can be registered. You can register with the local government. Okay, and if you can register with the government will then grant you a certain right. And that is where then the IP becomes that's where your intangible asset becomes intellectual property. And that's the one that many people are very familiar with. In fact, many lawyers will be sharing that with you when it comes to filing a patent, filing a trademark. So some things can be filed, and there will be things like a technology can be filed into a patent. A design can be filed into what we call a registered design, or in US we call it a design patent. And if you're gonna have, if you have a brand, then of course you have a design to communicate to your audience what exactly my brand means. Then there is a trademark. So you can actually file for a trademark to get trademark protection. And once you file for this, then in respective countries of your operation, then that's where you're granted a right, intellectual property right. And then that's where we'll talk. So what are some of the things that you can file? So you can file for patents, you can file for trademark, you can file for designs. There are a lot of other things, like for example, you can file for plant varieties, you can also file for integrated circuit, but these are things that I won't go into today. I think what will be most applicable into this context will be patents and trademark. There are also other things that you can't file, so things like copyright. Copyright doesn't require you to file. So as the moment you type an email from your email account, copyright is birth. Okay, so copyright literally talks about your creation of your literary works. So whether you write a poem, a song, a movie script, and things like that. So that is where you have a copy, and there's an automatic protection on that. On that note, I do want to highlight that ideas are not protectable. Ideas are not protectable. So for example, if you look at singing competition, there's a lot of, so for those who are familiar in China, there's a lot of this, you can use America's Idol. There of course you get America Got Talent, you have Britain Got Talent and things like that. You cannot protect the concept that people come and do shows and perform their talent in front of you. But what you can protect then is that you create a brand over it. You lock in your judges. So for example, you feel that the 4 judges are your key division. These are your intangible assets, your judging panel. So you lock in using contracts tracks to lock them into this, so that once they are judged for your show, they can't judge for other show. So the way to differentiate between one show to the other show is really not the concept itself, but the judging, because you find it judge very hilarious. You like what he says, and you like the kind of participants they got. Okay, so I hope that is in a nutshell what are exactly different IP, or in this case IA, that's available.
Yeah. So Ruben, adding on that, I have been watching a reality TV show called Shark Tank, and you were talking about design patterns. In fact, in Shark Tank, I'm always hearing the term about utility patterns and design patterns. You know, and you know, we hear all this jargon. Maybe can you just share very quickly what's the difference between utility pattern and a design pattern?
Okay. US has a lot of has different names, but a design pattern in to us is actually a registered design. So what this protects is really the aesthetic. So for example, if you're in the business of jewelry, or you are in the business of furniture, you know, so then how does that furniture looks? How does that jewelry look? That piece of jewelry looks is very important. And what you are protecting is really aesthetic, not the technological part, but only the aesthetic itself, the way it looks. And that is your design pattern. So if I have a water bottle here, right, and I found a design pattern of how it looks, it really just protects this. If someone else creates another way of design, then you don't have protection on that anymore. Okay, so that's design. That's also what you call design pattern. In Singapore, we call it registered design. A utility pattern is basically just another pattern. So that itself is the same pattern that we talk about in Singapore that usually grants you a 20 years protection. But of course, you have to maintain them, not renew. You have to maintain them, so you have to pay maintenance fees after the 4th year. Now, there are in some countries, there is something what we call a utility model, not a pattern, but a utility model. So these are subject to individual countries' laws. So if I'm not wrong, if my memory is serving right, I think Thailand has one of them. So a utility model, how it works is that it grants you, it will then, so if I were to share so there are 3 things that people look out for when they file a patent. So, and this is generally the same across the world. It must be novel, meaning to say it must be brand new. Whatever they are filing for, that claim that you're filing for, it must be brand new. It must have inventive step. Inventive step means that it cannot just be an A plus B put together, you get C. Because this patent application will be examined by an expert who is skilled in the art, who is skilled in the field that you're applying for. So to them, they cannot just look at it and say, hey, they also can. It must be something, it must be a technology, there must be a breakthrough, there must be an inventive step there. It's not so simple as A plus B. And last but not least, a third criteria is called industrial application. So that one usually is not a problem for most of the patent application. Okay, so when you have this criteria, there are some countries that actually have what I call utility models, whereby they may grant shorter tenure of protection, or they may grant looser protection, but then the criteria of them judging is a lot lesser. So for example, maybe they will not be so concerned about inventive step, but so long it is novel. And then for that, they will grant you. So different countries have different standards when it comes to a utility model. But by and large, we will advocate filing for a patent, because the patent then is really that monopoly right, and it's much stronger.
I think you have shared a lot earlier, and even right now I hear that different countries seem to have different types of standards when you apply. I mean, understandable that different countries have different laws. But I think maybe one thing that I would like to ask next is about the filing of intellectual property, especially for patents. You know, patents are especially important when it comes to protecting your innovations and your ideas. And a big question mark therefore is, what's the process like to file the patent? And maybe the second part is, how expensive is it? I think that's the 2 big questions that we probably want to ask you.
Yeah. So if you really want to file, so I will go on later after this to talk about whether it's to file or not to file. But before that, if you're looking at filing itself, one thing we need to know is that 2 things you need to know. Filing is subject to country, individual country. So if you file for Singapore, you only get, and if you get granted in Singapore, you only get protection in Singapore and not in Malaysia, because you're talking about the law giving you a right. Okay, so it must be defined by the country. And secondly, you can, the other thing to take note of is that once you start to file, then you lose that that secret, that element of mystery, that element of secretive. Because what happens is that when it comes to patent filing, you need to disclose, you need to share, you need to disclose that invention, and in exchange of that disclosure, then they will then grant you that 20 years, up to 20 years of protection. Okay, so that part I do want to put it up front first, because some people will think that after I apply for patent, can I still keep my trade secret? It's not possible anymore. It's not possible anymore. So unless you are very distinct about what part you file and what part you don't, so then there's a hybrid of trade secret and patent. The process like that, the cost, the ballpark for every patent filing is about $10,000 per patent, $10,000 to $20,000 per patent, depending on so the bulk of the cost really goes into your patent attorneys or your lawyers or patent agent who's helping you to file. In terms of in Singapore, to file for a patent, the registration fee itself is about $2,000 over dollars, about 2005 if I'm not wrong. So when I say $10,000 to $20,000, part of the cost actually goes to your patent lawyers who will help you draft the document, because while it's a technological information, the lawyer will then help you convert that information into a legal document for submission. Okay, and and indeed in some other countries you may even need to cater in costs like translation. Yeah, because not all countries can file in English. In terms of when it comes to trademark, it's about $1,000 a class. So there are 45 classes, class 1 to class 45. If I remember correctly, I think class 1 to 35 or 36 is products, and then you have the rest of the classes are services, goods and services. Okay, so you need to file in the right classes. So that's why in Singapore you can actually see things like Tiger Balm, Tiger Air, and then you have Tiger Beer, and they're all Tiger, but yet they don't infringe on one another because they are filed for different classes. Okay, so they're altogether 45 classes. You need to file in the right class. So it's about one mark, one class for $1,000. In Singapore, it's actually very cheap to file. You can even file by yourself. I know trademark attorneys are going to hate me by me saying that, but in Singapore, in IPOS, we make it as very easy to file. So you can even use an app called IPOS Go. You can file it in 10 minutes, about $200 over to file for trademark in Singapore. But why do I say $1,000? Because then if you seek the help of a trademark attorney, which you may need to, especially if you are filing for different countries. Okay. Now, I just want to take a bit of time now to talk about the two different, because you mentioned process. I mentioned that because when you file for its individual country, but at the same time, we understand that within the IP world, the IP ecosystem, they understand that, oh, it cannot be la Chonghe, one person cannot go to 10 countries individually to go and file. It's quite difficult. So we need the UN. There is a body called WIPO, World IP Organization, and we need the World IP Organization. All the United Nations members are members of WIPO, and they all come together to come up with some international filing systems to make it easier for people to file. So if you're filing for patents and you have intention to go to different countries, do file the patent under PCT or Patent Cooperation Treaty. So that is actually a system that has been, so most of the members, if I'm not wrong, I think there are 153 countries who are member states who are signatory to PCT. So if you file for PCT, it allows you to, once you file for a PCT filing, then what happens that then that date will be reserved as a date of para, as a date of registration. That date is very important because anything else after that date will not be taken as will not be taken against you in terms of para, but then they will examine anything before that to see whether if you still fulfill that novelty. Okay, so once you file for that, you have up to 30 months. You have up to 30 months before you decide which other country to go for, which is very important because if you don't file under PCT, technically speaking, I filed today in Singapore, 1 year, 1 month later, I decided to file the same thing in Malaysia. I can't do it anymore because that patent that I filed in Singapore becomes the para and block myself. I block myself in Malaysia because it must be brand new in the world. Okay. So I hope I did not complicate it, but if anyone needs more information on that, just drop me a note and I'll be happy to share that with you. Under trademark, there's something what we call a Madrid protocol. A Madrid protocol. So when you file for trademark in Singapore, if you're going to file for other country, you need to file in Singapore first, and from there you can use a Madrid protocol to help you. So Madrid protocol allows, which Singapore IPOS is a signatory of both, so you can use that system to file in different countries at the same time, so that you don't have to one by one go to different countries. You can actually file maybe 5-10 countries at a go for trademark. Okay, so I hope that clarifies. If there's any more confusion, feel free just drop me and I'm happy to share with you separately.
And Ruben, I think one thing I did catch is the topic about prior arts, right? If there's anything that's been done before, and that's very significant, especially if there are any researchers out there who is listening to this. I've read and I've heard cases of researchers, especially academics, professors and associate professors, they go for conferences, they share about their research, and once it's been shared, it's out there. And the problem with that is that it's really a prior art, it's really common knowledge, and it's no longer novel in that sense anymore, right? And this is very significant, especially for startups, because I mean, the area perhaps I want to probe for you next is that startups generally are more financially restrained, right? And the topic perhaps I want to ask you is there a way for startups to do their own background checks, to do their own prior arts, to check on their own prior arts, And I think that's something very important for them, right? So maybe I'll just ask you about this. How can they do a very quick background check?
Okay, so when it comes to researchers and all this, you are absolutely right. So just to address that question that you shared, that point you made earlier, if I'm not wrong, I think there was an example in Crocs, the Crocs sandals. So again, they actually wanted to file for a design patent, and then after that, the marketing team was very quick in sharing going to marketing, going to conferences, and sharing the new slippers or flip-flops or whatever you call that, and end up because it was released. Then the team decides, the IP team went to file. End up whatever the examiner found in the public domain end up blocking them because it's no longer novel. Okay, there are exemptions now. There are exemptions now by different IP officers that cater for up to 1 year. Up to 1 year. So, for example, if this year, if I'm filing it today, but let me 6 months ago, I may share a bit during a conference, for example. So there are allowances for that, but by and large, I would still recommend that, as what you have rightfully pointed out earlier, I would still recommend that keep it as a trade secret. Do not reveal anything to the public until such a time that you're ready to file a patent. If you decide to file a patent, okay, because that exemption is not hard and fast, it's not cast in stone. So it's still subject to you making a lot of appeal and requests to the patent office for the exemption. Now, back to prior art search. Again, I think there are a lot of free patent databases out there that you can use. Google Patent is one good example. There's also Patent Scope that you can try. So these are all free patent database that you can use to do your own quick search. The tricky part is that it's not so simple, because in the sense, so let me just use Google for example. If Jeremy and I are now decide to look for char kway teow, the keywords that you use and the keywords that I use differ, and we may get different results. So the real art in that prior art search is really being skilled in the knowledge in that domain, and plus using the right and the appropriate keywords to pull out as much information as possible. And when it comes to patent examiners, they don't just only pull out from patent information, they also pull from public domain information, just to make sure there's no novelty. And some of them may even go through some obscure libraries. So long as it's available by public, it is up for them to check. Okay, so I would, by and large, I would recommend that if you know how to conduct a prior art search, you can always do it yourself. Within IPOS International, we actually have a training program called How to Perform Prior Art Search. So we also impart and share with people how you can do that. But really, I would strongly suggest that if you are very serious about filing a patent, that prior art search perhaps is best to be conducted by a professional, because then they will know exactly what to look out for. We at IPOS also perform that search, that check, but we also suggest, we also recommend that you also talk to patent agents who can also do that for you. All right. So there is unfortunately, if you really are going to file a patent, there is no running away from doing that search, and that search is important so that you don't waste your time and money later on when you start to file when you go through the whole filing.
Okay. Thanks very much, Ruben. I think we have talked a lot about filing for patents, knowing the background. I think the next thing I want to ask is that, whenever we talk about IP, especially when we talk to VCs, we talk to law firms, every one of them is always going to advocate, to basically file for a patent, and they could have their own agenda why they want to do so. But I think one thing I want to ask IPOS, since IPOS is a non-profit, neutral organization that doesn't make money from getting companies to file for an IP, I think you're in a better position to advise startups about whether they should really file for one. Because in reality, when you file for an IP, and as you have said, you're actually endangering the startups because certain important information is being released to the public. So, yeah, I think the first thing I want to ask you is, what's your opinion about the dangers of filing an IP?
Okay, so that's a fantastic question. I'm glad you asked that. I think the important thing to identify first is really, let's just talk about patents first. I think patents and trademarks are, like I mentioned, these two are. If it's a trademark, I would suggest please file. If your budget allows, please file. Trademark is not expensive. And once you file for a trademark, it puts you on a different position when it comes to litigation. Because then instead of you suing someone for copying you, then end up have to prove good. And because you didn't register your mark, you have to prove that you are the first one to use the mark. And then therefore there's a lot of goodwill being compromised. So you need to, the onus of proving is on you. But once you file for a trademark, then and it's granted in that country, then when you're going after copycats or counterfeits, it's a different position altogether, because then what you're going after is that people are copying your mark, but and the mark has a legal right, has an IP right that's granted by the country, and they are now infringing on that right. So the onus of proof then becomes a lot more easier. That's why I would, and trademark is not that expensive. I would advocate people, I would suggest people to file for that. When it comes to a patent, there are a few things that we need to discuss. Firstly, IP and IA are really your business asset. They are not just a legal tool, they are a business asset. So you need to ask yourself, do you really need to file for a patent? If you're talking about patent, do you really need to file for a patent? Why are you filing for a patent? You need to answer that first. And there are many reasons why people file for patent. Some really file because it's a protection. And some really file because they want to use it as a signaling tool, because a lot of VCs are asking for patents, so they need to signal it. They may want to signal to the stakeholder. They may want to tell stakeholder that in the environment like this, if all my competitors have patents, I better have a patent, because not having a patent means that I'm not one of the pioneer, I'm not one of the first mover. So that could be the positioning. So patent forms a kind of a signaling tool as well. But other than that, but that's it. So again, I mentioned you must understand why do you want to file for patent, and is patent really the best way forward. Secondly, you got to ask yourself whether can you detect it, detectability, because a patent is a negative right. And so a negative right means that it's a bit like speeding. So I hope there's no TP in this call, because I don't want TP to be calling me up. But the example I'm going to share is that expressway in Singapore is 90 kilometers per hour, 90. I drive, and I have to confess, I hope this doesn't put me into admission of guilt, but yeah, I speed, so, and by me speeding, a lot of time, unless I'm caught by a camera or I'm caught by TP, otherwise I speed I infringe, in a patent term, I infringe on the speed limit without having any penalty. Okay, so the same applies to your patent then. You need to be able to detect. So detectability becomes very important, because no point filing a patent if you're not able to detect. So for example, if your patent lies in the manufacturing process, so unless you really go all the way into your competitor's factory to see that they are infringing on you, but that's provided you don't get caught for infringing into private property in the first place, trespassing in the first place. So if you can't detect, then is filing a patent still usable? Because in this case, if you can't detect, you can't take action, you can't enforce. Okay, so the other thing is also whether can it better be a strong patent? Can it be a workaround? So what I mean is that, because we are living in 2020 now, so we are always standing on giants' shoulders. So if your patent is not going to be something that is very dominant, very strong, and once you file and becomes a public information, people can just work around it easily. Yep. Then technically speaking, you are providing free information to the world, and I just have to work around it. And I'm not saying that patent is not the way forward, don't get me wrong, because I think it all boils down to individual businesses. So for big companies like Microsoft, Coca-Cola, it's really a combination of patents and trade secrets working hand in hand for that, or even pharmaceutical companies. It's really a mixture. So I mentioned the first three things. Know why do you really need a patent for? how do you intend to use this pattern? Can it be detectable and can it be easily worked around? So these are just some consideration you need to have before you decide to whether you want to, do you really need to file for a patent or not.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, going very quickly into the industries because I want to answer as many questions as possible after this. I think it's very hard to give advice to startups because it can be very specific to the industry, right? In regards on whether they about their intangible assets, about their patents, etc. And right now we are in the midst of we're in the midst of Industry 4.0 where physical objects are getting increasingly connected. And typically this industrial term is Internet of Things IoT. And one thing that when I was thinking about IP is when I'm facing IoT is a very fast moving industry. You know, according to Moore's law, you know, technology can be obsolete just within 2 years. So I'll just get your thoughts about intangible assets and IP filing for IoT, you know, just a very quick thoughts. What's your quick thoughts about IoT industry?
So you can actually file for software patents. You can get a patent protection, and IPOS is very familiar. IPOS is also very mindful, concerned of this movement. So that's why in Singapore, sometimes we actually have a S3 patent fast. We actually have S3 fast track. Before it was actually a patent fast track. So what we do is that we try to expedite certain certain industries, patterns of industries, or rather I would say certain technology. So we try to do it as quick as 6 months. So for fintech, you know, the last one, if I'm not wrong, I think it was Alibaba. We actually grant them a patent in 4 months, which is revolutionary in that sense. But of course, the rule of you are right to say that it all depends on individual company. But the most important thing I will come back is that sometimes you still have to file because there are different purposes that you want to attach to them. So for example, you may want to file a certain technology because even if other people can work around it, or rather it is fast moving, but if whatever that you create forms a backbone within that industry, or you find that it's something that everyone will need this to work, to improve their work upon. In IoT, for example, if you feel that whatever you come out is going to form a backbone, or in this case, going to form a base in this certain area, people need to then work with me to improve things even faster. Then that makes in that sense, filing a patent means a lot. But of course, if you are using IoT to create, I mean, IoT is a very broad term, but if you are using different sensors and then using internet, and then you are using the way it collects, it moves and link things up with your own proprietary software, then those perhaps it's really a mixture of some parts could be worth patenting, some parts would not be worth patenting because it could be overtaken rather easily, or you are coming up with your own software itself. It's really about a software is a software, but ultimately it must serve a purpose. So it's really about inputting it and getting this output. And in that sense, if someone else can write another form of algorithm using another way of interacting with a hardware to get that, then chances are, even if you have a patent, it may not be very strong. But that's it. But if coming up with that pattern put you in a different position, because as I mentioned in my first 2 slides earlier, it's really not about being the first or the only one. All road leads to Rome. Okay, but because if I have a patent in the world of startup where my brand is not very strong yet, but I have a patent and my competitor doesn't, and both of us fulfill the same objective, then my clients would then send a different message to my client then, or my VCs then. So again, then that's really the signaling purpose. And even if I release this information to public domain, would that really harm my business? Because perhaps this way of having sensors or digesting information into this to grant you to bring out certain outputs, it could be in the form of machine learning. That itself is not as precious. I hate to say it, but it may not be as precious as the data that I managed to collect and digest, and then the readings that I can get out of it. That value adds. And that is the part maybe I should keep as a trade secret. Okay, so by exposing that part, would that really cause a dent in my business? So that's the other thing to look at.
No, coming into IT and software, which you're saying, I think that's definitely an area. In fact, one of the questions, if I remember correctly, before I shared slides, was about software and apps. Now, touching your point about software, I think there's a big question mark for many startups in regards to IT, AI, and fintech. Google is very famous for keeping their algorithms a trade secret. Amazon, on the other hand, has famously patented their one-click buy button. So maybe I just hear your thoughts for IT, AI, and fintech and software-related companies. Where do you draw the line? What would be some of your advice in regards to their intangible assets, as well things that should be kept a trade secret, things that should be patented in this area?
Yeah, so that what the industry that you highlighted are very broad.
Yes.
It will still boil down to really boil down to who are their target. Or like first of all, fintech. You have those who service the banks, you have those who service the end users, you have those who service individual consumers.
Yeah.
You have those who are talking about payment gateway.
Yeah.
So again, they cater to different markets, and then therefore they have different business objectives, and their mode of entry could be very different.
Yeah.
And therefore that brings me back to my first slide that I mentioned that every businesses is just really about carving out the space for yourself. So even if there are like 10, 20, 30 payment gateways in the market, you can still have the 21st payment gateway and you still be able to survive and still have its own market. Yeah. So it's really what is that differentiation that you have that makes a client comes to you and not go to the other one. And with that, in that case, then the IA is it really in the solution itself when it's very similar to the other 20 solutions earlier before you, or it's really other form of IA that you have. It could be really the customer's relation that you have, or it could be a prior relationship that you have with this client in your previous life, in another employment. Yeah. So I think with that in mind, technology is technology, but which is there's no right and wrong. Bottom line is when it comes to suggesting and advising to the company, it's better to understand really what space are you operating in, what are the kind of risks and challenges that you have, what are the opportunities that's presented before you, and how can you then utilize what your IAs are to mitigate those risks and take advantage of those opportunities.
Yeah. Thanks, Ruben. I think actually a quicker answer to just say, if you have any questions about you want to file for IP, whether it's worth doing so, actually to talk to you directly. And I think afterwards we can give your email address, I think, okay, next part I probably want to ask you very quickly before we go to the Q&A, because I think there's a lot of very important questions that's came up. Is about collaboration. Collaborating with other companies is something that every startup will require, and some of them will naturally have to reveal certain information about their technology along the way. So for successful collaborations, what are...
Pretty sure everyone else can hear me, right?
Yeah, can you?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, great. Okay. Yeah, I can hear you now, Jeremy.
Okay,
no
sorry.
So, yeah.
Yeah, sorry. So yeah, I was saying that basically collaborating with other companies, especially at a startup level, they tend to reveal certain information about the technology. So the question I have in mind, and to just probably answer in 1-2 minutes so I can go to the Q&A, is for successful collaborations, what are the intangible assets and IPs that startups need to be mindful of, and what are the important considerations that you should have in mind?
In short, before you enter in the collaboration, be very clear about what are your intangible assets that you have, what are you bringing to the table, what are you getting out from the relationship, and then how do you put in controls to make sure that you get what you want, and controls to make sure that what you are not being taken for a ride, or you're not being on the shorter end of the stick. And so if I were to give another very similar example, it's really like marriage. So before I enter marriage, I usually want to find out, who the other person is like, what are the money, what are our goals, how many kids we want, and things like that. And of course, the moment you get married and you haven't settled some of these things, you can still talk it out. But it's very similar in the sense that you must know what you have first. You must know what you have, your intangible assets. Because as I mentioned in my summary, if you do not know what you have, you may be running a risk of sharing too much. You may be running a risk of giving too much. So for example, if I enter a collaboration with a distributor, or if I work with someone to manufacture for me and then to sell for me, and I'm not mindful that I have a trade secret, I end up telling them everything without signing NDA, or I don't have a clause to say that they cannot produce same things for other people, or I don't have a clause to say they must China wall, because as a big manufacturer, they'll be manufacturing for other people as well. but then they must have a certain process where they say, look, this team will only work on your teams, your product, so that they will not talk to other people. Otherwise, they'll be sharing your trade secret to other people as well. So these are things that if you are not mindful that you have a trade secret, and then you end up having a conversation with a manufacturer like that, you end up maybe giving something away.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and also collaboration with other big people, like, in this case, you have a lot of IHL. So maybe some startups are working IHL. Then IHL default position could be saying that I need to own the IP. Then in that case, does that mean that it will put you on at a disadvantage? It may or may not be. See, so again, you ask yourself, what is the end goal? What do I want and what am I giving? And then, and in the event that if I do not own the IP and IA a lot boils down to ownership. You must get the track of ownership correct. And if I do not own the IP, can I license it then? Can I license it in very favorable terms? Because licensing, there are also many forms. There's also exclusive, non-exclusive, sole licensing. It can be for duration, it can be for a certain purpose, it can be for certain jurisdiction. So that's a beautiful part about intangible assets, that you can really cut, slice, chop any way you want. And therefore it presents that it can grow in different countries at the same time in different ways.
Okay. Now I think I'll go quickly into Q&A. There are a few questions, so I'll try to cover as many as possible. The first one is from Steve Xie, and is asking, what are the types of intangible assets for software or apps? Maybe it's data or something along those lines. What are the types of intangible assets?
To Steve, I think that will be easier if I can have a chat with you, because as I mentioned earlier, individual IAs doesn't just reside only in the particular industry that you are in, but also the kind of company that you have. So for example, you and I can be both in F&B business, but I could be a reseller. I could take my goods from the factory and then then my IA could be in the way I distribute. On the other hand, you could be the one that is actually manufacturing a semi-finished product. And then someone else could be actually relating to the raw materials. So even within the same sphere, everyone has different IAs depending on the space you service.
Okay. We have another question from...
Sorry, can I ask directly?
Sure.
If you don't mind. So Ruben, actually, I think the one problem that I face constantly on this IP issue is the confusion on, what can be actually done on IP lah. So, and I'm willing to pay for this kind of IP consulting services. So like a consultation session to run through what can I do in terms of finding out. So what would you suggest in that sense? Is there consultants or services who does that? And usually what's like a typical process? Like how much does it cost and roughly, how do I do that? Yeah, thank you.
Sure. Thanks, Steve. I don't mean to give you a motherhood statement, but I would strongly suggest that maybe you can drop me a note. I'll put my email address over on the chat. Drop me a note so that we can have a chat separately, because even when it comes to consultancy, it's the same, unless you say that you are seeing a GP. But if you're not seeing a general, you're not seeing a GP, but you're actually seeing a specialist, then again, different specialists charges differently and have different way of diagnosis. Yeah, so again, I think it would be easier if we can have a one-to-one chat just to find out a bit more. What are your area of concern? Is it really about prior art search? Is it really about identifying your intangible assets? Is it about freedom to operate? Or whether is it about I need to work with various partners now, I need to work with different different stakeholders now, partnership, and then therefore I have different kind of risks available present before you.
Okay. We have another question from Ofa, and I think Ofa is asking a question about e-commerce. I think Ofa was asking, what is protectable for e-commerce? I think earlier I mentioned the case of Amazon's patenting the one-click button, but maybe you can share more about this.
Yeah, so it depends on what you are selling on the e-commerce, but by and large, it's really the... Okay, so firstly, I need to know whether are you selling your own product or are you a reseller? Okay, because if you are reselling someone else's on an e-platform, then it's a different kind of... But by and large, if you are selling your own things, then it depends on which country you are selling to. Or in this case, you are selling to other countries, which is what e-commerce presents to you. Then, of course, the kind of protection that you have is, I would then strongly suggest that you sell end products, finished goods, so that then in that case, your consumer will just purchase your finished good and consume the way it's meant to be. I think when it comes to B2C, the risk is still not so much. What is scary with B2B? Because then they may actually value add. So if you're B2B, for example, I may buy certain parts from someone, and then with that parts, I will actually use that parts to form a bigger product. So to paraphrase that point I made earlier, for example, licensing, YouTube. So if you were to watch a video on the YouTube platform, then you're not infringing. But if you download the YouTube video and show it, notwithstanding, people are still viewing it. It could be the same viewer, but the way you operate, the way you present the content, then you have actually infringed on the terms and conditions of the license that YouTube has granted on you. For example, newspaper. So while if you buy the newspaper at $1 or whatever, how much you pay now, you are actually paying for that paper to read only. And that is your agreement when you pay for that money, the $1. But if you're going to cut it out and then frame it up, and let's say I'm being featured, I frame up, then you have misused that purpose of that purchase, the acquisition. Yeah. So I think when it comes to e-commerce, if you're just selling B2C for final consumption, I don't see a major problem in that, unless you have a specific case that you want to highlight to me, then we can talk about that.
Okay, maybe I'll go to the next question. Ofa's second question is basically whether IPs can be to be protected globally or in each country separately. I think you've answered that already. Yeah. I see a question from Benny Tan. Yeah, I think we'll skip the third question for Ofa. If you have more time, we'll go back to it. I think I'll answer Benny Tan's question. I think the one that's important because of time restraint is Benny Tan has said that he has given a demonstration about his software prior to the patenting. So he's asking, will it affect the patent?
Okay, it depends on what kind of demonstration you show and what. So it's like if I have a secret recipe, I made my food, and then after that I let you taste the food. Just because I only taste the food doesn't mean I reveal my secret recipe to you. Yeah, so you taste the food, you like the food, I make you buy the food, but it doesn't mean that my trade secret is being revealed. Yeah, so it's still encapsulated within that process. Yeah, so it depends on what exactly you're patenting. What do you want to seek patent for? And also sometimes we also encourage non-disclosure agreement. If you're working with a potential partner or you're making a pitch to VCs, it's good to sometimes maybe get them to sign an NDA. And NDA, and of course, if you're a legal expert who can help you draft an NDA, that's fine. Well, but if you don't, I think in general, basically, it's just really a terms and conditions to say that whatever I'm sharing with you, you shouldn't share this with other people. You should keep it to yourself, and then there's a survival period. So even right now, what we are discussing now is for the purpose of you investing in me. But as a result, even if you decide not to invest in me after this certain time, there will still be a survival period of maybe another reasonable time. Bearing in mind that no matter what contract you get yourself into, it must be reasonable. It must be reasonable. Because in the eyes of I'm not a lawyer, I have to emphasize I'm not a lawyer, but reasonableness is one thing that the court always look out for. Because if it's very unreasonable, it's skewed one-sided, then usually it may not be well in your favor as well.
And very quickly, Benny, Ruben, we cannot file patents by ourselves, right? We have to go through a law firm, I presume.
No, you don't have to. You can actually file a patent by yourself, but it's just that if you're not familiar with the process or you're not familiar with how to respond to a patent examiner, then in this case, you may put you at a disadvantage because then you may jeopardize your application. So this is, I mean, a simple example I give is that, for example, to us, a whale is a whale. A whale is a whale, but a patent attorney may write it in a way that a circular disc that rotates 360 degrees clockwise and anti-clockwise. So at one stroke, I try to block everything that's circular and turn. Yeah. But what exactly you have is actually a wheel. So it's things like this that the way they phrase it, they are able to help you phrase it as broad as possible so that you get a big coverage. And big coverage is important because then it makes your patent very strong. It makes working around it more difficult. It makes licensing more attractive. Then people have to then license from you to work on to base off that.
Okay. I just want to ask you one last question. I know we are running over time, but I think it's always very important to answer as many questions as possible. I'll circle back to Ofa's question. So number one, we do know that IPs have to be filed in each country. Maybe if it's EU, then you get one block of an entire region already. So I think the question that OFA is asking, if it's by country and therefore by region, how does it work for global brands? Do you need to file an IP application for each country because it's quite complex, extremely costly? Yeah. So this is very important. Yeah, this is a very good question. How do you answer this?
They do. In fact, just for those who are a bit more interested, in Singapore, we actually receive about 12 to 14,000 patent applications a year. But those that are the patent application just by Singapore companies alone may not be more than 10% or 15% of that. I don't have the exact numbers off my head, but it's there about. So majority of our patent filings are actually from overseas companies, and they file here is because it's also because we are also a big trading hub. So if any of those infringing goods that pass by the port here, they can take action here as well because there's a patent protection over here in this country. You see? So you are right to say that when it comes to for big companies, so even where to file is a conversation that we need to have. And of course, we totally understand that resources are limited. And that's why earlier when I mentioned that there's a PCT, which you will find out more in your conversation with a law firm in the next 2 weeks. The PCT itself that gives you a 30-month window, which is very important because within that 30 months, you can see where your business is going, where are the strong opportunities that you have, and then you file in those selected countries. So it's not for startups, for SMEs, I really don't advocate that you file in many countries, but you pick and choose and you pick your battles. But the important thing is no one company rests on one patent. So a patent really, so other than pharmaceutical, sometimes it's very hard to see a company using that patent for the full 20 years. Yeah. So a lot of times, sometimes after that, because you'll be developing new technology, you'll be coming up with new innovation, you'll be working on. So your patents keep getting refreshed with new updates.
Yeah.
And then your protections then evolve to the next level. Then after a while, 10 years ago, whatever they come up with become a base already.
And I think the term is background IP, and the new ones will be called foreground IPs, if I remember correctly.
Okay, so background and foreground IP is about a collaboration. So let's say if Jeremy and you and I are entering the collaboration, whatever that we bring into the collaboration are called background IP. Whatever that we generate out of the collaboration is called foreground IP.
Okay.
Yeah. And you will have a lot of that when you work with IHLs, when you work with different partners. And because for startups, one important thing for startup is that it's important to then find someone that is strong in the industry they can work. So for example, if I'm in the payment gateway, then I need to find a big company who can then use this. Firstly, for a start, it could be prototyping. Because I have an MVP, but I need to bounce off a big user to see whether it can be done. So that the big user may then come in, and at the same time, then would there be some sort of collaboration being formed? And then if there's a collaboration being formed, what are you bringing to the table? What are you getting out of it? Because then when you further develop into the final end product, there could be some new IP being developed. And who owns those IP then? So that's where the foreground IP, then that's why I mentioned collaboration. It's important that you actually be very clear what are your IAs, what are you bringing in, and what are you getting out of it.
Okay, Ruben, just one last question before we end this.
Sure.
I think there are startups here, many startups are going to deal and raise funds from VCs. Do you have any advice for startups who are being pressured to get a patent, especially when they're unsure whether they should get one? Do you have any advice for these startups?
I think what's important is really to know what IAs that you have. I keep coming back to that because in all my previous companies I work for, in all my previous lines, people will tell me to be careful. But I really cannot be careful of what I do not know. So if I don't know that there's a pothole in front of me, just keep telling me be careful. I will still fall into the pothole because I don't know what to be careful about. Yeah, so I think it's important to really understand the market, know yourself, know what are your intangible assets and what exactly are you filing, and do you really need to file? Do you have the resource to file? You don't want to go and of course, if the VC tells you I'm going to put in $2 million once you get a patent, I think that one will become a no-brainer. I'll just file for it just so I can get $2 million. But then you see, if it's a savvy VC if it's a VC who is savvy in IP, who is savvy in patent, he will then also need to understand how strong your patent is. If I mentioned earlier, why do you need to file a pattern? Is your pattern, is it easily detectable, and whether can you work around it? And if your pattern is weak and is easily detected, and is not easily detected and is weak, filing is as good as not filing. Or if I only found in Singapore and not in other countries I operate in, then why would a VC still put money in you? Yeah, so I think it's with that, it is with that in mind that we also need to understand that it must be a mutual love. The VC must also love us, must be able to say, hey bro, I will really put money in you if you really, I like everything you said, but I think I see a risk there, that they're not protected by a patent. But one thing to understand why patents, why VC value patents, because at startups, everything is intangible, and sometimes you may not even be making revenue at this point in time. So at least they see a patent as something that they can grab hold of, because it is an asset. As I mentioned, it is an asset. Being an asset means I can own it. And by owning it, I can then use this asset in my other ventures, for example. Or I can find partners who then see value in that.
Okay.
So maybe that, so that's one reason why they could be asking for that.
Yeah. So thank you very much, Ruben, for your time. If there's any further questions, Ruben has put his email in the chat. You can always contact him over email. Alternatively, you can scan the QR code that's on the screen for a complimentary 45 minutes chat with Ruben or one of his colleagues in iPods International. I think that's very important, especially when you want to talk about something that's personal or something that's more specific to your company. I'm sure Ruben will be able to share more and give you a greater advice for that. Going forward, I think I just want to share